Hello to all of you out there in 386. I trust that you are doing well today. We're going to cover the remaining information for exam 2 today. But before we jump into what we're going to discuss, I'd like for you to take a minute just to think. I would like for you to think of a time when you were absolutely convinced that you were 100% right. However, you found out you were 100% wrong. As I'm giving you a minute to think about that, I'll share a time that it happened to me. You see, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I like to monitor her texts and the things that she does on her phone and on her computer. And a couple months ago, I was looking through some of her texts, and I noticed that she was having a conversation with a friend, and she was frustrated. And in all of this, then I noticed that one of her texts contained an emoji that I did not like. So I'm furious, absolutely furious. And I walk up to her room and I ask her, I'm like, why in the world would you think it's okay to flip someone off? And she was like, Mom, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I saw the text. I know what you did. She's like, no, Mom, I would never do that. I would never do that. Why do you think I would do that? Well, then I start getting more angry because now I think she's lying to me. And I'm like, no, like I saw the text. I know what you sent. Why would you think that's okay? And she was just adamant. She said, no, I didn't. I didn't, Mom, I didn't. And at this point, like she's even get some tears. So I'm like, okay. I said, well, look, I just need to take a minute. I need to take a minute to go breathe because the truth is I was angry and I didn't want to say anything that, was coming out of complete anger. I wanted to be able to have a conversation with her. So I said, I just have to take a break. Just give me a minute and we'll talk about this. So I walk out of her room and I'm like breathing, trying to, collect myself and give myself a few minutes. And then I go back in. I said, okay, talk to me about the text. I saw it. And she's like, Mom, would you show me what text you're talking about? She said, I really have no idea what you're talking about. So I did pull up the text, and she had sent an emoji that I thought was inappropriate. As it turns out, there is something that happens to your eyes as you get older, and you should wear reading glasses. Okay? It means that you can't see details, very well up close. This happened to be one of those times for me. And she's like, Mom, look at this. So, of course, I get my glasses, I put them on, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. I thought it was an inappropriate emoji. As it turns out, there's an emoji that has like two snorts blowing out. It's just like the yellow face with two snorts blowing out. And if you look at that emoji without your reading glasses, it looks just like a face with two hands doing something inappropriate. This is one of those instances where I was convinced I was 100% right. And thankfully, thankfully, I was 100% wrong. Now think about a time like that for you. You're just convinced that you're right, but you weren't. You were completely wrong. Now, why would I ask you that today? As we start to talk about customer discovery and validation, why would I want you to remember a time when you were completely convinced you were right, but you weren't? It's because when I talk to entrepreneurs, a common thing I hear from them is they're absolutely 100% convinced that their idea is a good one and that everyone in the market is going to love their idea as much as they do. Sometimes, thankfully, they're right, but sometimes they're 100% wrong. In business, I'm a big proponent of never assuming anything. We do our homework and we know the answers to our questions. So at this point, let's review just a little bit. I'm going to share screen with you, so bear with me as I pull up the whiteboard and get my screens adjusted here so we can continue to talk. Give me just a moment. And now let's review for just a few minutes. Go back to the beginning of the semester, and here we are. Well, let's make that black, not yellow, so you can see it. How about that? Let's erase that one and let's go with black. Okay, now, beginning of the semester, we've talked so much about this model. This is the entrepreneur. We've talked so much about self-awareness, about bounded rationale, about uncertainty that lies out here. We've talked a whole lot about forming teams and how we do that, strengths and weaknesses. We've talked about exercising our entrepreneurial awareness and making observations of possible problems in the market. Then using empathy in order to define the real problem that the market is wanting solved. Now, once we do that, then we can come up with multiple ideas for solutions to that problem. After we do that, then we need to run these ideas through a market opportunity navigator. And hopefully what it's done at this point is it's helped us to identify which opportunity is the best, the one that we think that we should pursue now. And also it should help us to identify the proper customer segment that we should be pursuing. We've also learned that the customer segment should be very, very specific. Now, while I know there's some other things that we've talked about this semester, this kind of is a very succinct summary of where we are in the entrepreneurial process. This allows us now to enter information into the business canvas. And what we now know is this is squares number 1 and 2 that we should fill in. We should write in who our customer segments are here. And we can now write a value proposition, which is going to tell the customers why they should choose us as opposed to our competitors. Now, we've done a lot of homework to get to this point, and we should have some really good ideas of who our customer segments are and our value proposition. And we should have already been thinking outside of our myopic bubble. However, what we have here is just an educated guess. It is a hypothesis. Go back to your science class. A hypothesis is an educated guess. It's not an uneducated guess. What I think, that's always a big red flag. It's an educated guess based on all of the homework we've done to this point. So once we get here and we say, okay, I've got a really good hypothesis to start from, what's the next step? How do we test our hypothesis to see if it's correct? This is where customer discovery and customer validation come into play. And you should have read the 2 articles about customer discovery and customer validation. I'll write that out for you. This is when we go through a process of actually talking to people and asking them questions to determine how correct our value proposition is and how correct our customer segment is. You're going to learn more after exam 2 about how to really do customer validation, and for the final project, perhaps do part of this. But I want to talk to you today about what it means. How do we test the hypothesis and why would we do that? Customer validation is a process that occurs through interviews. We're going to ask people questions. And the questions are going to be aimed at finding an answer as to, do they really have the problem we think they have? Do they really value a solution to the problem? And would they pay for that solution? Also, we're trying to find out, is our solution one that they perhaps would value? Now, when we start thinking about how to do customer validation, excuse me, let me get back over here. I'll stop sharing screen with you now so we can get back to the full screen. Stop sharing so we can get back to the full screen. Sometimes, you know. So we should start thinking about, well, what does that mean? Well, how do we really test our hypothesis? How do we really find out the answer? And there are some rules that we should follow when we start conducting interviews within a customer validation process. First and foremost is these conversations, these interviews should occur in person or either on the phone. They should be face to face, on a Zoom, or perhaps on a phone call, but they should not happen via email and they should not happen via survey. So, why? Well, this is where we really need to pull in the skills and the tools that you've been introduced to so far in the semester and really use them. You need to learn how to listen between the lines. You need to learn how to use empathy and how to succinctly pull the information together to compare it to your value proposition and to your customer segments. So when we do emails, and sometimes, we'll type out questions and send an email to someone and say, hey, will you answer those and send them back to me? Well, when you get an email like that, how articulate are you in the email? Do you go on and type out your answer? Or you type just enough to get your point across? Just enough to get your point across. And that doesn't allow for the person doing the interview to really hear your answer, to be able to read your body language, and to truly listen between the lines. So sending questions via email, not a good idea. People will say a lot more than they would type. Also, surveys. When we do surveys, we limit our answers to, let's say it's multiple choice. It's 4 answers. We limit it. Well, what if one of those answers is not what the respondent was wanting to tell us? Once again, we're not collecting good information. Customer validation is a form of primary research. And in doing so, we need to be sure that we conduct our primary research correctly. So, face-to-face, video, or a video conversation, or on the phone is how customer validation should happen. Second thing that you need to know about the interviews is that you can never, ever, ever mention your solution. Ever. Now you're like, how am I supposed to find out if they value my solution if I can't mention it to them? Well, if you mention your solution to them, you're going to immediately bias their answers. We've learned about biases already, and we know that once you hear a piece of information, that tends to change the way that you answer questions. So we don't want to give them our solution. The next thing that you should know about interviews is that your questions should be all open-ended. Try to avoid closed-ended questions at all costs. Now, what do I mean by closed-ended questions? Those are questions that have a binary answer, yes, no, true, false. We don't want questions like that. While we may have one question like that, it needs to be followed up with an open-ended question. And an open-ended question is one that allows the respondent to speak freely and to give you whatever information it is that comes to mind. We don't want to limit what they say. So if we can't give them, closed-ended questions and we can't mention our solution, then how do we do this? How do we correctly write out questions that are open-ended that test our hypothesis? Well, let's talk about this with an example. So in Alabama, it gets really hot and really humid. And it can be hot from the month of April till Thanksgiving. And when that happens, we can be on campus and we can look around and we can see people getting really hot and really sweaty, trying to walk from their cars to class or from building to building to get to classes. It can get kind of miserable, honestly. And we've noticed that it makes students seem to be pretty unhappy. So we're like, observation. A lot of students don't really like getting hot in the middle of like the heat, getting to class and between classes. That was the observation. So what's the problem? Problem is, perhaps they're feeling uncomfortable, uncomfortable and embarrassed because they get sweaty. Maybe their shirt's wet from sweat, especially you take your backpack off and the whole back is just drenched because you've been sweating. Um, Perhaps, it's just like you just get grumpy when you're hot, grumpy and cranky, and you really don't want to learn anything. Um, Perhaps, you get like you don't want to sit beside the person who's smelly because they've gotten all sweaty. And that makes you feel super awkward and uncomfortable. You don't want to move. Perhaps maybe even students avoid class because they don't want to deal with the heat. I know that that's a thing. Students will just say, like, I'm not coming to class. It is just too hot. I just can't get out. That leads to anxiety over missed work in class, not knowing what the teacher covered, being counted absent, leads to a lot of things. So these are what we want to address. We want to start trying to solve the problems the students are feeling. And so as we start thinking about solving that problem, we come up with multiple solutions that we run through the Market Opportunity Navigator. And what we finally land on is let's make an air conditioned jacket. A jacket, you put it on, it's a cooling jacket. Cools you off. You put it on, you wear it around when it's hot outside, and then you can take it off in class and put it in your backpack, just like you do in the winter when it's cold. Just a cooling jacket. Okay, well, that's going to be our solution. And the customer segment that we have identified are college students that have to walk a long distance to class or between classes that live in a really hot climate, where the university is in a really hot climate. And so we've narrowed it down to those. Now, we want to write out a set of questions that are open ended that will find out if our customer segment really is having this problem that we think they're having, if they and find out if they want a solution and if they're willing to pay for a solution. But we can't mention ours. So what should those questions sound like? What are we looking for? Well, the first question that I would ask after I build rapport with the respondent, and let me back up before I give you that question, is you have to build rapport before you just dive right into questions. You want the person to feel comfortable with you and you want them to answer you honestly. Think about going to the doctor. When you go to the doctor, doctors who have a really good bedside manner will come in and ask you, like, well, hey, like, it's good to see you. And this, how's your family doing? Oh, well, how's it going at the University of Alabama? Are you about to finish up? What's your major? And they'll ask you a series of just like things like that are very conversational. And they'll say, well, gosh, it's really good to see you. So why are you here? Tell me what's going on with you. And you feel much more comfortable answering the question honestly if the doctor has built up a sense of rapport with you. Think about that as you start to interview your respondents within the customer validation process. So we've built up a little bit of rapport, and you say, yeah, I mean, like, it's so good to get to talk to you. Thank you for being here today. And we'll go ahead. Let me just jump in on the interview and let me ask you. Question one, okay? Let me ask you, can you tell me about a time when you have felt uncomfortable because of some kind of weather condition? It's a very open-ended question. It was not, have you ever felt uncomfortable because of a weather condition? That's a yes/no question. It was, can you tell me about a time when you have felt uncomfortable because of a weather condition? Now, what we want them to do then is to speak freely and to start to tell a story. Give them a minute to think, because they'll be like, it's not an everyday question. So, and then let them tell you the story without interruption. We want to hear a story that revolves around something that made them uncomfortable because of heat. Now, perhaps they're going to talk about heat. Maybe they're going to talk about it being cold. Maybe they'll talk about an uncomfortable time when it was raining. We don't know what they're going to talk about, but we just have to let them talk. We're going to ask this question of every person that we interview. And in the real world, we'd interview a lot of people, a lot. Maybe not so for your funnel project. You'll interview just a few. but we interview a lot and ask them the same question. And what we would hope is that they would tell us about a problem that they had relating to heat. If they do, and a majority of them mention the heat, this would tell us that the problem that we see is, in fact, a problem. But what if a majority of the people talk about a situation that involves rain? Or what if a majority of the respondents talk about a situation that involves cold? Then what that would tell us is that those weather conditions are a bigger problem for the market than the heat. So we would have to re-examine the problem that we identified, and perhaps it wasn't as big a problem for the market as we thought. Remember, we can think we're 100% right when we're 100% wrong. So that would be one way to start it out. Let's just say that they said, oh, yeah, it was something about heat. And they told us, like, I was really hot and I was miserable. The next question I would follow up with was, well, will you tell me what you did to help you not be so uncomfortable? And then what we're looking for here is, well, what solution did they choose? Is it something that was just around them? Did they buy something? What did the solution look like? Did they just get a fan and fan themselves with a book or whatever? We want to figure out, like, on an ongoing basis, how did people solve this problem? Did they go to an additional piece of clothing for some reason? What did they do? And gather the data. We would want to ask some more questions like, well, if you could have solved this in another way, what is something you feel like would have been helpful for you? And let's let them get a little bit creative. Let's see what they come up with. Then when we could follow that up with, well, if a solution existed to solve this problem for you, how willing on a scale of 1 to 10 would you be to pay for that solution? Now, 1 to 10 is still open-ended. It gives you a scale in there, but they can tell you at that point how much they value paying for a solution. Now, we're going to talk more in depth about customer interviews and some questions after exam 2, but I really wanted to introduce this concept to you of customer validation and let you know that we've made it to the process of identifying a customer segment, being very specific about what that customer segment is, and we've written a value proposition. But still at this point, it's just an educated guess. It's a hypothesis. Now it is time for us to test the hypothesis through a process called customer validation. It's really hard sometimes for people to go through the customer validation process because they feel awkward interviewing people that they don't really know. You see, when you do this, you need to pick people that perhaps are in your network, but not your closest friends and family. Your closest friends and family are going to support you. They're going to say, yeah, good idea. Way to go. Sounds awesome. That is not reliable information to use in judging whether or not the market is demanding your solution. So you could pick someone in your network. Maybe it is your brother's boss's wife, someone that you kind of know who they are, but you're not really around all the time. And like I said, it can feel awkward when you're talking to someone that you don't really know and you're asking them some questions in an interview process. But I promise you, once you get the first interview going, it really becomes much easier. It's just that getting started. It's kind of like when you wake up and you're like, oh, I know I need to exercise today, but I don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. But once you get your clothes on and you get out the door and you get to the gym or go for the run or whatever it is you're doing, once you get there, you're like, I'm so glad I did this. I'm much happier. The interview process it might not make you that much happier. I will be honest with you on that. But once you start, you're going to realize it's not as awkward and it's not as hard as you think. So we're going to get this information. And when the information we get, we'll bring it back and we will look through it and we'll say, okay, like, yes, I feel like this has validated the problem that I mentioned that I think I see in the market. I think it has validated the fact that this customer segment is really looking forward to a solution to this and that they value a solution enough to pay for it. And in turn, I believe that my solution is going to help them. We'll get more in depth after exam 2, but really, like I said, I just needed to introduce this concept to you now. In the readings also on customer discovery and customer validation, it gives you the 4 stages in there. You should know all of those. And you should also know what a, oh my gosh, it just left my head, a product evangelist is as well. Um, and a product evangelist can come from these people that you interview initially. These are going to be people who really, really, really value your solution, so much so that they're going to be your first adopters, the first ones to buy your product. And we want to really serve them and serve them well. Get their feedback, allow them to have some ownership in the product, and give you, some ideas on iterations. We're going to be talking about customer validation in this class, and this is really where we validate the value proposition in the customer segments. As you move further into the entrepreneurship minor in 387, we'll talk more about product validation, and that is where we develop a prototype or a minimum viable product, and we test that with our customers, and we make iterations to the product. But that's 2 different things. Save product validation for 387. We're just going to do customer validation in this class. But really do pay attention, like I said, to product evangelist and that term, just so that you're familiar with it and you know what it means. Now, this is all the information that we are going to cover for exam 2. We've made it there. It's quite a bit of information. I'm going to give you some good time to review this and to go over it. Next Tuesday, we will not meet as a class. Rather, I want you to use that time to study, to really pull together this information, and your exam 2 will be next Thursday. The exam is going to be just like exam 1 was. It's going to be on Blackboard. It's going to be a mixture of multiple choice and true false. I'll send you an email out telling you what time the exam is available and giving you a little bit more detail on that. But if you have any questions about the information that are going to be on the exam, just go to the website, ginasimpson.online, and you can see all of the info for exam 2 under there, the book chapters, the readings, and the information that I have given you here in your video lectures are all fair game for the exam. I know that you're all going to do extremely well on it. I look forward to seeing all of the A's that you have on the test. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, just email me, let me know, and I will be happy to help you in the best way that I can. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk with you all soon.